I think the benefit of that is there's no supplement, there's no medication, there's no therapy, there's no laser, there's no, there's like, you can't replace that. And I think it's very important, maybe if there's one thing that anyone gets from this podcast, it's this. It's like, that's a therapy in and of itself. And what you brought to me before the podcast and everything is that ultimately, like, look, gratitude helps regulate dopamine. Yeah. And it's free.
It's free. Maybe it's not always easy, but it's definitely free.
Welcome to the Longevity Formula with Dr. Brandon Crawford. Let's explore the new era of wellness.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about a chemical inside your brain that determines so many things about your life. This chemical is going to help you make decisions. It's going to drive what you eat. It's going to drive what you say. It's going to drive so many different things that define your life. Okay. I'm talking about dopamine. And to join me in this conversation, I have one of our favorite guests of all time, Dr. Jeri LaVigne.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in. I consider you definitely a dopamine expert. I know we've had so many different conversations about how this neurochemical really helps define our life. So I'm really excited to get into this. And so the plan is we're going to talk about dopamine first. What is it? Where does it come from? Why do we have it? Who knows where that conversation is going to go? It's going to be fun. And then next we'll have a part 2 and we'll talk about, do we need to have this digital detox, dopamine detox? Like, what does that look like? What does it even mean? Right? So it's the plan, right? Awesome. So dopamine, what are your first thoughts? What is this thing? Why do we have it? What's going on?
It drives us so much of the time, right? It's that anticipatory feeling. It's looking for the next thing. It's waiting for the next, it's always searching for that next step. Right. And if you even go back to, they've done so many studies now on primitive societies and initial societies, and how many of those initial tribes were led by dopamine-driven individuals because they're looking for their next place. They're looking for their next home, right? Mm-hmm. How to make that. I mean, it has run us since day one.
Yes. So dopamine, it's this neurochemical, right? And it's coming from this older part of the brain called the midbrain, right? From an area called the substantia nigra pars compacta, right? There's other areas it comes from, but that's the main area. And this area is also called the mesencephalon. And I remember when we were studying the mesencephalon, the instructor, I think it was actually Tom Culleton. He was a good friend of mine. He was teaching neurology at the time. He put up this picture and it was the mesencephalic beast, right? And he was describing this like, this beast is only worried about food, sex, and survival, right? And I think that that's an exaggeration about dopamine, but I mean, largely, that's kind of what it's doing, right? Dopamine it's not just about pleasure, right?
Right.
Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's a misconception, don't you?
I do. I think that, well, like I said, I think that dopamine is an anticipation molecule, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is this whole idea of wanting versus having. Mm-hmm. So buyer's remorse is an excellent example to me of a dopamine-driven decision, because what winds up happening in that process is that dopamine promise gets broken. Because you told me if we bought this house, we'd be happy forever, that this family was just going to thrive. If I had this car, then I'd be getting all the dates, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. And so when we don't find that balance, when we don't figure out or can't chemically balance those chemicals, all of those neurotransmitters, dopamine is either driving too fast or it's not driving enough. And it's just, I think it's so important. I love this conversation because I think it's so important for us to figure out how to regulate ourselves.
Yes, 100%. I also like for everyone to understand, if we talk about dopamine, we also really need to talk about epinephrine and norepinephrine, So those are just fancy words for adrenaline. Norepinephrine is like adrenaline in your brain. Epinephrine is adrenaline in your body. And these neurochemicals are about pushing you, making you move, doing things. Like this is connected to our sympathetic nervous system. And what people may not realize is that if we get too much of a buildup of norepinephrine in our synapse, it starts to shut us down. And this is very much related to burnout, to caregiver fatigue, to what you were just talking about. So I was pushing. I got this. And it's like, what happened? That's a little different discussion. We'll get into it. But what dopamine does is it degrades norepinephrine in the gap in the synapse so that you can continue to push. You can push through the pain. You can do these things. And that dopamine is largely driven by the purpose, the passion, right? And so if you're just constantly seeking something or working on something you're not passionate about, you don't have purpose for, then yeah, you start to get burnt out. You start to, fall out of love with what you're doing, right? I mean, it's a discussion that I think is very important for our society right now, because I do feel like we're being disconnected largely from our purpose and our passion and these bigger things that I think we should be thinking about, right?
Well, yes. And I think too that the way everything comes faster, now when I think about a 30-second soundbite, holy cow.
So long.
They just go on and on and on.
Right.
Now, what a Snapchat thing lasts for 10 seconds. Right. Those kinds of things. And so I think that on the one hand, as a society, we're driving that dopamine push, You've got to get it. You've got to stay on top. What's the next thing, kind of thing. And so it's interesting. We've talked before about how brain scans have changed so much in the last, 50 years since they first started doing them, and how up until 20 years ago, now there's a pathway for your thumb swiping across a phone screen where before there wasn't one. Yeah. And I'm horrified, frightened, and fascinated all at the same time to see where we're going with this very visual, very dopamine-driven social direction.
Yes, 100%. 100%. I think something else we need to really understand when, we're thinking through dopamine, what it is and what it does, is the pain-pleasure balance. In that, as we're seeking something, we're getting this rise of dopamine. When we achieve it, or when we don't achieve it, there's a dramatic drop, right? And that drop is driven and associated with something called dynorphin. And dynorphin is that dopamine crash, and that's where essentially pain comes from, right? This, or what you can call suffering, or this uncomfortable feeling, right? As you're seeking, you're getting this rise. And let's say you rise up to here, right? And then let's say you achieve that goal. You buy that house, you get that car, you get that thing. You will have an equal, if not larger, crash, right? Associated with that dynorphin. And then what happens? Well, the person wants to start seeking again, right? And I think when I actually was able to understand that, right? Because I knew it from a chemical perspective, like I knew it from studying neurology, but when I actually experienced it and felt it, right? That's when I really understood, oh, okay, so maybe I do need to rest. Maybe I do need to recover through this quote painful, period, right? And that's going to be largely what we focus on next. But I mean, I think it's important for people to understand this pleasure-pain response, whether it's from a patient perspective, whether it's from a everyday life perspective, marriage perspective. I mean, it's just, that's what life is, right? It's just this up and down. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I do, because the greater the crash, so the higher sometimes the achievement or the goal or reaching that goal, and the harder the crash, there is, especially in pain, because we know from studies that serotonin and oxytocin and endorphins endocannabinoids, the THC of the brain, right? That those are the things that help alleviate the pain. Those are the things that help stop. Those are what Dr. Liebowitz and Michael Long call the here and now molecules.
Yeah.
Right? That other side of that dopamine. And when we can raise those chemicals as the dopamine's going down from that initial, okay, check mark, I got it, then we can find ways to not have caregiver fatigue, where it's a total burnout. Yes, is caring for somebody else difficult? Absolutely. And we just know it's a hard job.
Yeah.
But there are ways to fight off that constant fatigue, that continual burnout. Same thing with pain. I think those are similar brain-wise in how we treat them.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a matter of finding that balance between those other chemicals so that dopamine crash doesn't have to be so devastating.
Absolutely. And I know that we've talked about this, especially with like the chronic pain syndromes, but it's almost like chemically there is a possibility where someone can actually become addicted to their pain.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think what I want the audience to also understand is that pain and pleasure are experienced in the same parts of the brain. And I think you've actually said that on the podcast before.
Yes.
And this may be difficult to understand because what I'm not saying is it's your fault you're in pain. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying you have a system that is set up so that it is possible to become addicted to a pain syndrome or to anything really, to any kind of deleterious event that, has been associated with this dopamine system. That's something that I feel like we're very effective to help someone navigate that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think you have so many tools that I don't have. I think that, there's so many ways you can help someone in that scenario. Do you have any kind of words of wisdom or anything to help? I know I put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I think that, I think there are a lot of ways to build those kinds of things up, so when we want more oxytocin, it's tricky, because everybody says, well, hug for 20 seconds. Okay, you start hugging somebody for 20 seconds and they completely freak out on you.
Right.
So that's not always the best way to do it. But playing with a pet or giving a compliment, holding hands with somebody, even if it's the person that, even if it's if you're in a caregiving situation and it's the person that you're caregiving to, just physical touch, preferably not here, but,
right.
just being able to relate in that physical way, those things build oxytocin. Serotonin, being in nature, meditating. And meditation does not mean spending 60 minutes in a lotus position chanting Om. It may be in the shower, or it may be while you're stopped at a traffic light.
For me, it's when I run.
Or for you, exercise. I mean, it doesn't have to be this whole separate, because it's just one more place where we set ourselves up, right? Not to achieve, which will eventually be another part of this conversation, right? But so any place where we can just, the here and now chemicals are about the five senses. If you can taste it, touch it, feel it, hear it, see it, then those things will help raise those other chemicals and will help balance out some of that dopamine.
Nice. Yeah. Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. Meditation, calming one's spirit, calming one's mind is not, I can't sit in a dark room with, in the lotus position chanting Om. That would actually drive a stress response in me. Maybe that's a problem. I don't know. But if I run and my body is in motion, which has a great connection with this dopamine discussion, right? Because dopamine is about pursuit, right? And so motion helps to regulate the system. That gets me into that deeper meditative calming of my mind. Like I can be so pissed off and frustrated at the world. And if I go run, I am in a much better place. Right. Not only that, but this is interesting. If I run in on a day that's 100+ degrees and I have a hill beside my house that I love to sprint up, and I will push myself, I will run until I start to see spots. And it's like I'm starting to get tunnel vision. It's like I'm pushing myself to a painful place, just like I love cold plunges, right? That is actually more calming than if I were to just go for a leisurely jog. That's just me. I'm not telling everyone should do that.
Well, no, but we're right back in that pain pleasure center.
Absolutely.
I mean, it makes perfect sense.
100%.
And if you're not a runner, you can watch a funny movie. Or you can okay, so I know this sounds silly. And for anybody that's ever done it, you're super uncomfortable the first part of it. But there's this thing called laughing yoga.
I've not heard of this.
Yes. So there are people who are certified as laughing yoga instructors.
Nice.
And you are doing yoga positions, you're doing the mantras, but at the same time, it's a constant forced laugh. And there are studies where they do brain scans before and after, and it's amazing the way that this opens up the pleasure center and those kinds of things, helps balance out those here and now chemicals. So I think exercise is very important. I'm just saying that, there are other ways to do it as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love this idea of laughing yoga.
Yeah.
Sounds more fun than hot yoga.
It definitely sounds more fun.
What is it, goat yoga? Or
there is goat yoga.
I don't know if I could do the goat yoga thing. Maybe we should bring in laughing yoga too. I think that I could get behind that.
Do you really?
That sounds fantastic.
Okay.
I like to laugh.
I may hold you to that.
Let's do it. Okay. That got me off my train of thought a little bit, but that was good. That was a good discussion. How about this? Let's talk about some universal symptoms of withdrawal.
Okay.
So some symptoms of withdrawal, that's going to be largely noted as anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria, right? And dysphoria is this unease, like you're not satisfied, the opposite of euphoria, right? That's dysphoria. Those are, noted in the research as like the universal symptoms of withdrawal from dopamine. And I think everyone out there is thinking, man, this is my husband, this is my wife, this is my child, this is my, right? But I think it's important to note, what this looks like so we can better understand it. We can identify it in our everyday life. One cool example, I was talking with a patient that we worked with for several years now. He had a stroke. And this guy was a great guy. He reminded me a lot of the people that grew up in my small, Texas town that I grew up in. He liked to work with his hands. He would run a bulldozer, kind of a rugged, kind of guy. So we're talking and he's talking to his wife. He's made great progress, but his wife was saying he's anxious. He's irritable. He's not sleeping great. Like what is going on? Like he's moving better and he's doing all these things better, but why is he like this? And it occurred to me, I was like, this guy ran a bulldozer. I guarantee you he was dipping snuff. And I was like, did he smoke or did he dip? And she was like, oh, you would never see him without a dip in his lip. And I was like, has he had a dip since his stroke? She said, no, of course not. He hadn't done that. And I said, well, let's give him a little bit of nicotine and see what happens. And it's interesting because I'll reference another study now. There's a study that looked at what chemicals or things increased the dopamine response. Like what kind of dopamine response did you get? And the study noted when we consumed chocolate, we got a 55% increase in dopamine. Sex increases dopamine by 100%. Nicotine increases dopamine by 150%. Cocaine increases dopamine by 225%. And amphetamines increase dopamine by 1,000%. And this is inclusive of our ADHD medications like Adderall and Ritalin, which are classified as amphetamines, right? I think it's important for people to understand, and I'm not telling people, I guess I should say this.
Let's have a caveat here.
Right. I'm not telling people go eat your chocolate, have sex while doing nicotine and cocaine, right? That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
It's just understanding that, we as soon as we start seeking dopamine or using some stimulants or something like that, we're creating new pathways in our brain. We're defining our personality. We're defining our brain plasticity. So we'll use it therapeutically sometimes, some type of strategy, not always nicotine, but some type of strategy therapeutically in practice to help someone overcome something or help someone with a movement disorder or help, something like this. But I don't know, I'm going on a tangent. I know I started in one place and I ended up in another, but do you have anything to add with, whether it be withdrawal, whether it be, some type of therapeutic strategy or something like that?
Well, I think that, again, it goes back to balance, right? It goes back to finding a way to balance everything out. And that's the tricky part of doing this work, even in a like with patients, because there's such a fine line, right? And it feels good. I mean, I like to be passionate. I like that. I like something new. I like the new idea, the new project, the new thought, that turns me on.
Absolutely.
And so I think I like these conversations because I think if we just have a better understanding of what that balance looks like or what that balance can be or how to achieve it, then people have a better way to work with this, and they're not constantly looking because what happens eventually is when we run out of, the list you just gave, when we run out of dopamine, then we're going to find something that will create it in us.
Yes.
Right. And then that gets tricky.
That's a great conversation. I was thinking about that. I don't remember when it was, yesterday. I don't know. But when you're in a situation and you're pushing, but you don't have that balance, that purpose, that passion, right? Then that's where it's easy to reach for one of these stimulants. You're reaching for the nicotine, you're reaching for the whatever, right? And that's propping you up for a period of time, but that is not a long-term solution at all.
No.
And ultimately can just then fuel this conversation of you being addicted to the pain. Like it can do that because your lack of passion and purpose will then send you into that hole, that dopamine quicksand every single time. Interesting discussion. And that's a great segue to what you brought up before we started this podcast about gratitude. So talk to us a little bit about gratitude.
So it's important because it helps. One of the things that we can use to help balance those chemicals. It's one of the things that, dopamine has 2 tracks. And when we get out of that long track, the one that goes through the prefrontal cortex, I think you have the whole pathway.
I do.
I do not.
What, do you want me to go through it?
Yeah, go through it.
Okay, so it's the limbic, cortical, striatal, palatal, thalamic pathways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when dopamine makes that whole circuit, everything just works better. Like everything works better. The body works better. The brain and the body connection works better. We're just on.
Yes.
And gratitude is one of the things that pushes that loop.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds corny and it sometimes sounds silly, and people talk about gratitude journals and different things. So one of the things that I do, and one of the things that I ask my patients to do when we're working with gratitude, is that every morning when you first wake up, because I want it to be I want it to become that first thing. And I'm all about cheap, fast, and easy. Yeah. I mean, that's my whole model.
We could take that in a couple directions. I won't.
Okay, thanks. But, it doesn't all have to cost $1 million, and it doesn't all have to be 100%. Super hard.
Yeah.
And
that's a great discussion.
You know what I mean?
100%.
And you first wake up in the morning, I want you to think of 3 things that you're grateful for. Mm-hmm. And really give it a moment, not the same 3 things every day. Right. Don't get stuck in it, because that's not gratitude.
There should be
that's
purpose
just repetition. There should be purpose behind it. That's an easy thing. It shouldn't take very long. If you're having trouble coming up with 3 things, then call me. We need an appointment. And then I want people to contact one person every day for whom they are grateful. And you can call them, you can send a text, you can send an email. Good grief. Now you can talk to them on social media. I mean, you got 1,000 ways to contact people. And you don't have to go into any long explanation. You just say, I thought of you this morning. I'm super grateful for you and what you do in my life, or whatever. It doesn't even have to be that sappy.
Right.
I thought of you. I'm grateful that I know you. Boom. Right. And it's nice because it pushes that gratitude in a different way, because you're having to step out a little bit. So we get to work on some of our own fear stuff. We get to work on some of our own issues. And at the same time, as a psychologist, it's really interesting to me to watch people's response to that.
Right.
Who's into, and another conversation I would like to have at some point with you is about receiving.
Yes. I was thinking in my head right now, I was like, I don't receive gratitude very well.
Right.
I'm aware.
So it's one of the things I push you on. Right? Because it's important. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting then to see how comfortable am I giving gratitude, and then how comfortable are people receiving it. And then eventually, sometimes that train gets back to me and I get these little texts of, I'm so grateful for you. And then I get to look at, how well am I receiving that? Like, where am I? it's one of those things that just helps us find where we are.
Yeah.
So that's my thing. Think of 3 things every morning for which you're grateful and contact one person for whom you're grateful.
I like that. So when you're doing this, is it someone that should be like an obvious choice? Like I'm thankful for my wife. Clearly or should you reach down deep and be like, I really don't really like this person, but I'm going to go ahead and break the ice and say I like them and I'm grateful for them.
I think you can totally not like someone and still be incredibly grateful for them.
100%.
Okay. So yes, absolutely. I think that's huge. And I think it just opens us up to be more of who we are when we can make those kinds of judgments. I feel like we're in a societal place right now where it's all or nothing. Mm-hmm. You like me or you don't. We agree or we don't. And if we don't agree, then we can't be friends.
Right.
Because I'm older, but when I think about growing up, good grief, my parents and their friends, my parents were big partiers. We had lots of parties and nobody talked politics.
Right.
You didn't know who your neighbor was voting for. There weren't signs in the yard.
Right.
You didn't know how much your neighbor made.
Right.
It's so different now.
So different.
And we're so locked into this. If we're not on the same team in every possible way, we can't be friends.
Yeah.
So I think that there are lots of people I'm grateful for that I don't want to have dinner with.
100%.
And so when I can include them, and I have, there's some that it's just, I'm not in a place where I can authentically reach out.
Yes.
But when I can, I think that's important for my growth. The only thing I can do is clean up my side of the street.
Yes.
Right. And whether or not they accept it, that's not on me.
100%.
But I can do my part. And then I'm grateful that I'm doing the work.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I've never even thought through this, but my parents had pretty differing political views. And I grew up in a time when I knew other friends that were in the same type of household. It's like one would vote red, one would vote blue. And there was never like a blow up about it. There was never like these crazy yelling, conversations at Thanksgiving and all this kind of stuff. It's like, I understand your view. Here's my view. I respect that. You respect this. And that's how I grew up. And maybe that's how I am the way that I am, I guess, but that was very peaceful. And it was very much, me understanding that just because someone doesn't think the way I think, that's okay. And honestly,
we could use some of that.
And
right
honestly,
now.
yeah. And that's honestly what I think builds a beautiful society, because then I get to hear perspectives that I never would have thought of because I don't think like that.
Right.
And then we get to leverage one another's strengths, right?
Right. And again, we're finding balance.
Yeah. 100%. That's a great closure of that loop. That is balance. You're 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, we can do a whole podcast on dopamine and politics.
Oh my gosh.
But I just felt like this wasn't the time.
That would be fun. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, you're right. I mean, gratitude is huge no matter how you look at it. I always like Dr. Emoto's work, where he froze the ice crystals and there was love and gratitude, right? Love and gratitude consistently would form symmetrical ice crystals. And when you looked at hate or something like this, they were very not symmetrical and what people would consider ugly and all this kind of stuff. And so love and gratitude, I've tried to have that at the center of my heart, right? But it's hard when you like another conversation with a patient yesterday. They have 4 kids. Their marriage is good, but they have one child that has a very high demand of special needs. Like there's a lot going on with the kiddo and they're a patient of ours and I agree, there's a lot going on. It's a very difficult life. What is the benefit and how can one find gratitude in those scenarios?
Well, okay. So you have to look at, I feel like you have to look at what you have. So there's a foundation there, right? They're all on this journey together. And how thankful to not be one parent, a single parent trying to manipulate the system and the therapies and the costs and all the things by themselves.
Right.
How nice to have a tribe to do this with, right? How nice to have 3 children who don't have this level of need. How nice that our child who has this level of need has the support from siblings, right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
That kind of thing. And to have a partner
right.
that, they talk about, if you can build a house together, you can stay married. If you can, working in with a lot of this population, if you can go through this kind of trauma, if you can go through this injury, this whatever happens to get you to us, if it's that kind of situation, to have somebody beside you that works. When I work with families in the clinic around this kind of thing, when we're doing some of my weird stuff, we had a family recently, and the husband and wife could not be more different. I mean, they could not be more opposite. And you hear, opposites attract, but do they stay together long term and things like that? But they complement each other so well. She's the big picture. She's the only reason they got to the clinic. She's the one that made that all come together. And he's the one that makes sure everybody's out of bed and dressed and fed every morning.
Yeah.
Right. And so as different as they are, it was so amazing to get to see how well they work together and how they keep this thing going. And those kinds of things you can't help but be grateful for.
Yeah. Right. And so I love that, it's like there's this elephant in the room that is dragging life down. But what about the 100 things that is uplifting, that we can celebrate, that we can, what I mean? I think the benefit of that is there's no supplement, there's no medication, there's no therapy, there's no laser, there's no, there's like, you can't replace that is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And I think it's very important, maybe if there's one thing that anyone gets from this podcast, it's this. It's like, that's a therapy in and of itself. And what you brought to me before the podcast and everything is that gratitude does help regulate these dopamine systems. We can talk about the ventral tegmental area, prefrontal cortex, frontal lobe, all of these things. But ultimately, like, look, gratitude helps regulate dopamine.
It's easy.
Yeah. And it's free.
It's free. Maybe it's not always easy, but it's definitely free.
True. Yeah, you're right. I mean, because sometimes it's not easy, Sometimes your spouse is a jerk. Sometimes the people around you are making it very difficult to be grateful. Sometimes, and does that make the response then even greater?
I think so. I think so. When I can shift, when I can be grateful for something that initially I just want to complain about, right? I told you when we started this, the first couple of months, this is hard. The travel's hard, right?
Yeah, you're traveling from halfway across the country.
And it was difficult.
Yeah.
And I had to get really clear, but I love, like, as soon as I'd walk in the door, I'd be like, I'm home. I'm supposed to be here. I know I'm on path, but why is it so hard? Why is it so hard? And so I had to stop and really look at that. And the minute that I committed to, this is the next right step. This is where I'm supposed to be, and this is what we're supposed to be doing. And I have no idea where any of this is headed, but I haven't ever had any idea where I was headed.
There you go.
I just go.
And that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
Is how to be okay with that.
Right. I don't have a 12-year plan.
Right.
If you had told me a year ago we'd be doing this, I'd told you were crazy.
Exactly.
But the moment that I could put all that in perspective, and what started that ability to put it in perspective was I have to always, and my teacher taught me this, I have to go back to what in the situation makes me grateful. What in the situation, where here can I feel gratitude? Well, I always feel gratitude for you, and you know that. And for our patients, and just for the work we're doing, and for being able to, I want to talk about models and breaking the model.
Okay.
Right? Because what is the most valuable resource in the world?
Love.
Creativity.
Okay.
I think so.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah. Talk to me about it.
And so we use dopamine, sorry. Sometimes use dopatone when we don't have enough dopamine. We use dopamine to build models, right? We build a model.
Okay.
everywhere from this is how I'm going to get out of the house to this is how I'm going to run a clinic to this is how I'm going to build this empire, right? We build models because those models allow us to project and to abstract and to look forward and to see where we think it's going to go.
Yes.
Right?
Plan, execute, strategize. Yes.
Until it doesn't. But dopamine's what drives the making of that model.
Yes.
Dopamine is what also drives the breaking down of that model. Right? Because when the model doesn't work anymore, then we've got to find a way to shift that.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
And so it fascinates me that it's so contraindicating sometimes, that it's what we use to sometimes create some level of stability. And then it's what we use to just completely tear that down.
Absolutely. It is. You're right. And that's a great discussion for sure. So is there, I guess number one is there's the need to acknowledge it, right? That maybe once we hit a place of stability that, well, the one thing that's constant in life is change, right? We're always going to be changing. And
Absolutely.
that goes back to the concept of like, I don't know where I'm going to be in 10 years, but hey, I'm on this great path and I'm doing what I need to do right now. And, but then understanding that as things start to break down, just understanding these concepts, right? And understanding needing to leverage things like gratitude, leverage things like movement, meditation, all of these types of things, how that can, what's the goal of that? Is the goal to accelerate the breakdown, or is the goal to stabilize, to slow the breakdown, or is it just to be okay with the breakdown?
I don't know. I mean, for me personally, just the way I think, it's to be okay with the breakdown, right? To be okay with this was great and this worked for this long and now it's time for something else.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. I feel like I'm having a therapy session. This is good. Well, and that kind of gets into a topic I wanted to touch on, and that's loss chasing. And it's different. It is different, but it's kind of along the same lines. So loss chasing is typically mainly associated with gambling disorders, or that's where it's defined in the literature mainly. We're going to talk about it from a different perspective, but basically it's this actual desire to lose and not necessarily win, because if you're losing, then that actually creates a stronger urge to continue to gamble, right? But what we were talking about is how loss chasing can actually be applied so much differently. Like these people, and we kind of already touched on it, like how this concept can maybe push us in a direction of failure or push us in a direction of self-sabotage, right?
Right. Because, okay, as human beings, we don't do anything that doesn't have a payoff.
Correct.
That's how we're wired.
Absolutely.
And a payoff doesn't have to be positive.
Right.
Right. And so when there's a comfort, it sounds so crazy when you talk about it, but it's true. There is a comfort in the disharmony. There is a comfort in the pain. There is a comfort in the losing, because this is what I know, right? This is what I know, and this is what I understand.
This is what I'm good at.
And this is what I'm good at. Yes. And this is what is expected of me.
Yes. 100%.
Right? And so when it's interesting, like I've worked a lot with addiction, and in my opinion, certainly there are similarities, but with gambling addiction, there seems to be more of this, the source seems a little different to me. Like you said, that the bigger the crash, then the bigger the need the next time for that win. And it seems a little different to me than a physical addiction to a drug, right? The mind games behind that and what we tell ourselves seem very different. And I think there's self-sabotage in all addiction, right? Right. But I like that this has kind of gone in a little different direction, because I think it is a little different. And then that relates for me directly to relationships. Why do people stay in abusive or toxic environments?
Yeah.
This is the devil I know. right? And even though there is this need for complaining about it and talking about it, how many people do you know that aren't happy and all they want to do is talk about how unhappy they are? Well, 100%. That's where they get that dopamine release, right? And being able to vent about the unhappiness, but they won't do anything to change it. Right. And so they just want to talk about it more and talk about it more. And it's kind of the same thing to me.
It is.
Why is that?
Addiction. Why do these, that drives me crazy. I used to be in a men's group a long time ago, and it's like, I'm all about solutions. And I'm like, every time we get together, all you guys talk about are the same problems. Why do you have the same problems?
Right.
Let's find a solution.
Well, and
I don't get it.
Right. And it's why I'm not everybody's therapist, because you get to tell me your sad story one time.
Right.
And you can take 3 appointments to tell me the whole story. I don't care. But we're going to do it once. And then we'll use pieces of it to move forward. But I can send you to people who will allow you just to sit and talk about how miserable you are for the next 100 years if you want. That's not my job. My job is to hear the whole story. Let's figure out your role in it. And then how do we shift out of that?
Yeah.
Right. And you'd be amazed how many people are not interested in that type of therapy.
Which is sad. I mean, I personally don't quite understand it, but it really goes into this exact topic, what we're talking about. It's almost like that wallowing in the failure, that wallowing in the uncomfortableness.
And it's not conscious.
Yeah.
When I tell people that's what's happening, I'm not so popular. Right? They're furious with me.
Right.
And quite frankly, if you're working with a therapist and you don't get mad at them on occasion, I don't think they're doing their job. Because I'm supposed to poke the bear some of the time in a loving and Christ-like manner, but still I'm supposed to poke the bear.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
But it's so ingrained and it's so unconscious. And when we use something like EFT or tapping to go back to, let's go to that feeling. Where's the first time you remember that feeling? Mm-hmm. And we wind up in childhood.
Yes.
Oh, well, my mother did that. My father did that. Well, she learned that from, it's generational.
Yeah.
But what I want people to know is in all of this, that emotional DNA is not... It is a hereditary thing, no question. However, it can certainly be changed at any point. The buck can stop here.
Yes.
With physical or emotional DNA, I believe we can change that.
I believe so too. And there's evidence that supports that we can.
Right.
100%.
Well, and I think these talks and how these chemicals work and what's happening in our brains and in our systems and in our minds help us figure out ways to do that.
Yeah. So I think the but the additional statement of, yes, we can absolutely change this, but it's not going to be easy or comfortable, maybe comfortable, right?
Okay. I don't want to set it up that way. It may be uncomfortable and it may be hard.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be.
Okay. I think that's good. I probably should, I should retract what I said, because we have seen, I've done the same thing where I'm working with someone and I'm going through, it's similar to EFT. I call it my desensitization technique, where we go back and we find a joyful time in life, then we find a painful time in life, we find a comfortable time in life, we find a fearful time in life, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm using acupuncture points and lasers to help basically regulate the limbic system. And literally I've seen people just snap out of it, whether it's a pain syndrome, a depression, or whatever. You see that more than I do. This is
right in the mind-body appointments, when I get to either work on a patient, or this week it's been a lot of surrogate. So mom or dad will surrogate for the person and for the child. And the body doesn't lie. Mm-hmm. So when I ask it a question and I have them think of a trauma, and they do, and they disconnect, and then we do basically, same thing. I use tuning forks and laser and meridian points and all the things, and kinesiology, and we don't talk about it. They don't have to wade back through it. We don't have to do all that. And then to have them think of that same trauma again and be strong, we're moving it out of their system.
Yeah.
We're letting go. And then their group benefits. Everybody in the room benefits.
Absolutely.
Right?
And a lot of people outside that room benefit too.
Absolutely. Right. Because we're back to our quantum
entanglement. It's a thing. Banks use it to move money. It exists. Anyway, so you mentioned something, EFT, that's emotional freedom technique. I think there's probably a lot of people that don't know that, don't understand that. I know it's not necessarily on the topic of what we're talking about, but you brought it up. It's a very powerful technique. And do you want to talk about that a little bit? Maybe
Sure.
explain it?
Sure. I like it, especially when working remotely, because it's one of the things that I know works. I've seen it work a billion times, and I don't have to touch you in order to really feel like we're making that connection. Right. So I really like it, especially when I'm not in the same room with somebody. And what we're doing is we're just opening up those points on the body where we can allow that energy to start to shift, right? And what's interesting is some of those points that you're hitting in EFT are neurotransmitter points. Right? This is GB23. This is acetylcholine.
Nice.
Right? And that's one of the points in a basic EFT. I like, one of the reasons I like some of the therapies that I get to use is there's a lot of science behind them, and they just kind of help pull everything together. And the EFT is excellent for helping balance those chemicals, getting the brain and the body on the same page, and allowing the system to start to first connect those situations, right? Because they'll always connect, and then letting them go. Because I tell people every time when we finish a session, you may think of things that you haven't thought of in forever. You may have crazy dreams. And we've had people come back to the office to talk about crazy dreams they've had, right?
Yeah.
But that's just the mind letting it go. It's just working its way through.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's a really extremely valuable resource, because there's even protocols, if you will, for EFT that
for sure.
you can even do just with yourself, and there's resources online for it and everything. But
must be a billion YouTube videos on every possible topic. If you want to make money, if you want to get a partner, whatever, there's stuff to
Obviously, I think it's better when led by one of us and all of that. Sure. But that's a whole nother discussion. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, because I'm going to put my nerd hat back on, because I think it's always really important to, if we're talking about dopamine, understanding the direct pathway, the indirect pathway, and the hyperdirect pathway, right? And this goes back to, where does dopamine come from? And, this is talking about areas in the midbrain, aka the mesencephalon, but just understanding that we have these pathways, and one of them acts like a gas pedal, and that's the direct pathway. And one of them acts like a brake pedal, and that's the indirect pathway. And we could break those down. We could get into it about whatever, and how neuroautoimmunity can make it to where you're constantly pushing the gas pedal, or, constantly pushing the brake pedal, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
What I want to point to is that we have two pathways dedicated to inhibition. We have the indirect pathway, and we have the hyperdirect pathway. And I just simply pointed out because I want people to understand how important it is to gain balance in a world that is so impulsive, that sometimes exercising inhibition, which is a very prefrontal activity, indirect activity, how that can be rehabilitative for the brain and actually help us live a longer, happier life. So do you have any comments on that? But my main takeaway here is how important inhibition is.
Oh, it's huge. And something that in school, I think we expect children to be able to inhibit. And
sit down, shut up.
Nobody teaches us how to do that.
Right.
Nobody teaches us restraint. Right. And when I'm working with kids, we spend a lot of time working on those kinds of things, on delaying gratification, on learning that there's a reward in not being rewarded immediately. And those are such foreign concepts when we start.
Very.
Right. But we have to know how to do that. We have to be able, if we don't have the pathways for that, we're not going to be able to do it. And so we have to build that.
Yep. And there's some really simple strategies that sound dumb that I have people do, right? So those people that are very impulsive, or they lack prefrontal integrity, that would be someone that has a difficult time planning, coordinating their day, really, thinking through, high level concepts and breaking them down, like this kind of stuff. And it's crazy to think that this works, but it does. So anytime you want something, I will tell people, put a time limit on it. Oh, I'm thirsty. I want a glass of water. I'll get it in 5 minutes. Set a timer. Oh, I need to go to the bathroom. Obviously, if you don't have a stomach bug, let's not do this. But, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. Set a timer. I'll do this in 5 minutes. Oh, my phone is ringing. I'm not going to get it right now. Oh, someone just texted me, right? You get that noise, that ding, that whatever it is. Talk about a freaking dopamine response, right?
Right.
Having to go, I'm not in my window of time to where I'm going to pay attention to my phone right now, and inhibiting that response. Not only is it important just to control these impulsivities and that kind of stuff, but you're actually beginning to build integrity in these networks of the brain that will then allow us to have a more balanced society, right? So important. So simple strategies like that can really add up over time and allow you to then, in a meeting, not, yell at someone.
Right. Exactly. Right. Or not get suspended from school the first week. But too, and just to jump back to addiction for just a second, one of the best analogies I have heard on being able to understand what that feels like is to not have your phone for the next 24 hours. And every time you think about that phone or what you're missing, that's the same as an addict brain. Where's my next fix? Where's my next high? Where's my next thing? And it's that constant. And I think it's just a good reminder of how intense that desire, that dopamine desire can be when we don't have those balanced.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, that's a good discussion that we'll continue in the next segment. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. I guess before we close out here, I wanted to point out, and it's funny because I knew this, but I didn't know it. Like it kind of hit me in the face, is that learning increases dopamine firing in the brain. Like learning actually has this dopamine driven response, and it makes sense, right? Because dopamine drives neuroplasticity.
Right.
So it would make sense that if we're learning a new concept or a new skill or something like that, that of course it's going to generate dopamine because that's one of the chemicals that helps shape and mold our brain.
That makes sense.
I hope that everyone has learned something, and it's important just to on that note, just understand that we need to continue to learn. We need to learn about ourselves. We need to learn about our relationships. We need to learn new skills. Like I want to learn new languages. I just got to find the time, right? But I don't know if you have any. I mean, you have a doctorate in education. I mean, do you have any, Dr. Jeri? Do you have any other discussions there?
I think again, it's about balance, because when we start this conversation, it makes me nervous because I bought so many courses and they're just sitting all lined up, waiting for me to find the time to do them. Right.
Is that
there's some balance there I need to find. But yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I get so excited about, I want to learn about that. I want to know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's funny because there are a lot of, I hear that a lot in our circle of, colleagues of, oh yeah, I bought that course. How was it? I don't know.
Right.
I haven't watched it yet. And it's that whole digital age. I so miss the in-person conferences.
Oh my gosh, me too.
It's too. Number one, you actually have to go to it.
Yes.
And you have to learn. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, I paid this. I got to go do it. Versus, I bought that. It's on my computer. But then just that social connection and that ability to engage with other people.
Well, and so many times, especially like in when I was new to functional neurology and those kinds of things, those conversations that happen at lunch or in the hallway or between presenters were just as informative and shaping for me as a lecture was.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I miss that kind of learning.
Absolutely. 100%. And that brings balance to the whole learning experience. Again, going back to your discussion on balance. Yeah. Well, cool. Was there anything else that you want to add to the discussion of part one about dopamine?
No, I think we covered quite a bit.
We didn't even get into all of it. I still have notes that we didn't get into.
Oh, I know. Me too.
But we have part two.
Okay.
And so everyone just make sure you tune into part two. We're going to continue this conversation largely focusing on, should we be detoxing from digital, aspects of life? What does a dopamine detox look like, and do we need it? And all of these things, right? So that's going to be the conversation that we're going to start recording now, but you'll have access to it next week. But Dr. Jeri, thank you so much for joining us. As always, it's amazing to always get to pick your brain and what you have to share to the world. So
thanks.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. So same as always, if this content interests you or you think it can help someone else, please share it. The reason why we're here is to help others. So please help us spread the word, and we'll see you next time.
We hope today's episode has inspired you to take that next step toward your best self. Remember, the path to longevity is paved with small, daily decisions. Your journey is unique, and every step, every choice, brings you closer to your ultimate vision of a healthier, happier life. For more insights, tips, and resources, visit drbrandоncrawford.com.